In this conversation, we're talking to David Tran about the importance of building our cultural awareness. Welcome to Happiness Adventure. I'm Lisa, and together we'll explore ways to cultivate real joy in our lives. I know something important to you is cultural competence. And how would you define what that is?
There are a lot of different definitions for cultural competency, but I think the resounding baseline for what it is the ability to effectively build bridges with someone whose culture and way of doing life, whether it's in the business place, at home, your neighbor, is vastly different than yours. Yeah.
And how did you come to care about cultural competency?
Yeah, so I grew up in an immigrant household. My parents were Vietnamese refugees who came over in the late 1970s because of the Vietnam War, and they resettled in Orange County, California. And the neighborhood that I grew up in was very Vietnamese. The food, the values, education, career, etc., was so vastly different than the community that I would meet and the friends I would spend time with outside of the home. So I was sent to Catholic school in Huntington Beach and also in Anaheim. And the way that I related to my non-Vietnamese counterparts was just so different. And it was shocking how different the value systems were. And I remember kind of being thrown in and having to learn the language by myself. And I just remember, there was a girl next to me. Every test that we took, whether it's a writing test or even a math test, I didn't know what was going on at all. Or how to make sense of I'm in school and this is a place for you to learn, but I couldn't learn because I didn't understand the language. So in second grade, I spent a lot of time cheating off of people on other author tests. Yeah.
How were you expected to learn under those circumstances?
I just had to. I think the immigrant mindset is a lot of times around survivability and surviving. And the way I actually learned English was Full House, Family Matters, and Power Rangers. And so those are the TV shows that I was exposed to early on and learned a lot of my English simply through watching TV.
Yeah. I think right now we're in an interesting place and time because there's movement toward being PC, but yet that's not anywhere near the same thing as having cultural understanding. So how do you think for people who want to understand and build their cultural competency that we begin?
One indicator of doing cross-cultural relationships really well is when you identify and build relationship with someone that is different than you, they invite you over to their house because that's an indicator that they're safe with you. So if that's the vision, or if that's, for me, that's how I evaluate cross-cultural relationships. For example, with Muslim friends who have a very different experience in San Diego, in the US than I would have as a privileged Asian American. If they invite me over, then for me, that's an indicator that, hey, there's a sense of trust and there's a sense of safety with who David is. But for those that, if that's a vision, then if your question is, where do I start? I would say invite them out for a meal. Have a meal with them and let them lead the conversation and ask questions. I would say that's a great place to start. Be able to ask open-ended questions to let them define for themselves what their experiences are and to really listen and appreciate that for, celebrate it or to grieve it or to simply just be with them in whatever experiences they want to share. I think something beautiful about empathy is, yes, while you don't want to assume anything about someone else's experiences, the universal characteristics that define each person and our humanity is that we all long for love, belonging, and purpose. And what does love, belonging, and purpose look like for our friends who practice the Muslim faith? And so for me to be in relationship with them, it really starts with understanding what's important to them. I mean, people love talking about things that are important to them. And recently, like during this Ramadan season, I was invited to an iftar. An iftar is a meal where after Muslims fast all day, it's a meal that they have once they break their fast. And it's a really valuable meal for them that draws them closer as a community. And there are actually a lot of, if you go to different mosques that might practice, you might have these kind of open spaces for non-Muslims to come out, to essentially just invite yourself and to say, hey, I would love to learn more about Ramadan. I would love to have a meal with you. Do you have any interfaith iftars that you might be hosting? And can I come? I would just love to learn and have a meal with you. And I think that's a really great starting point. Where do people have meals? When do they have the meals? What's the value and significance of those meals to them? And hey, can I join sometime? You know, in some ways, like invite yourself over a little bit, you know, and see how they respond or see how they react. Because I think having a meal is so standard. Obviously, a standard requirement for, you know, for any culture.
There's something very bonding about
Yeah.
eating together.
Yeah.
Why do you think that cultural competency is so important?
Cultural competency, at the root of it, is around practicing empathy. And empathy is saying, I may not be like you, but you and I are one and the same. Help me understand your experience in your own words. And there's something beautiful around when you practice cross-cultural communication and how to relate to someone that's so different than you. You're essentially taking a back seat. You're giving them the mic and you're saying, teach me about your life. And I think that not only enriches who that person is and validates their experiences, it helps you become a better person. It helps you shape your character and how you respond to quote unquote the other, where the other is no longer the other, but there's a bridge that's being built because there's an understanding that's being built when you listen to someone else. I think cross-cultural competency is, at the end of the day, it's just really good for the soul. It is a requirement to say, I'm willing to lay down my lens, my assumptions, my biases that I know, biases that I might not know, and say, hey, teach me about your life and teach me something new. And it's really posturing yourself to be a student of someone else, you know, a student of their own lives, and having their narrative shape yours instead of you shaping theirs. I think there's something beautiful about that.
It's a humble act.
Yeah, it absolutely is. Yeah.
We've recently heard from other guests that sometimes the greatest pain in our life becomes our purpose. Was that the case for you?
Yep, it was. When I was 18 years old, it was my first year of college. College is a time where you are a vulnerable being that is exposed to so many different factors, and you're malleable. You're shaped by people's opinions of you, their thoughts of you, and you're also shaping the way you think, the way that you learn, and learning how to learn. And I had a specific experience where I was checking out a community group on campus whose mission was to reach the campus and build the community. And they had around 500 students that were part of this community. When I first came to check it out, I really loved the mission. I loved the speaker. I loved what they were about. But something that was really painful for me was no one would really say hi to me. No one would ask me how my week was going. And I felt like I was just in the back by myself, feeling unseen. Yet what was preached on stage, if you will, was we're a community that chases after other people, that helps them feel seen. Yet while I love the messages, I felt that during that an hour and a half, before and after that group time ended, that I just felt really unseen.
That's one of the worst feelings, I think.
Absolutely. But what I noticed though was when I came home after about a month of attending this group, I had a suite mate that asked me, well, David, why did you stop attending this group? And I told them why. Could you think there might be other people who might feel the same way that you do? And that's when I realized that there could be. So I decided to check it out the following week. And when I came out the following week, I started becoming more observant. And I started looking around the room before the event started, during the event and after the event ended to see if there's anyone kind of standing by themselves, kind of twiddling their thumbs, looking around to see who they can connect to.
Yeah.
And I decided to make an effort to walk over and introduce myself. And a beautiful thing that came from that was from there on, this group that I was committed to over the next 5 years of college, my goal was to meet someone new every single week and help them feel seen and help them feel loved and help them feel that they belonged. And that experience really shaped why I love and practice cross-cultural relationships and bridge building. Because there's always the other. There's always people that live on the margins that long to be seen. And it bothers me a lot when people don't feel seen because I know what that feels like. And if the most private and personal things in our lives are often the most universal, that if every single person longs for belonging, then surely that person across the room that looks completely different than me, that doesn't feel seen by society, doesn't feel seen by the media, doesn't feel seen by the community or by the neighborhood, surely they deserve my attention in some way. And so that's why I love doing what I do. I love preaching and practicing the value and importance of bridge building.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
In your life now, do you identify people who you think you might want to build a bridge to, who could be marginalized or just be part of a different culture than you that you want to get to learn about and to see and to value?
We're all connected to our local, regional, national, and global community through our smartphones. And just to speak really practically, our smartphones and the platforms that are loaded onto our smartphones give us the ability to connect to the larger community. And basically, when you curate stories, who are you following? Who are you listening to at the end of the day? And for me, I've been listening to a lot of my Black friends. I've been listening to a lot of my refugee friends. I've been listening to a lot of my Muslim friends. And if I don't have any, I start following groups that tell stories that are unlike mine. It doesn't mean it has to be bad or worse or any kind of moral, it doesn't have to be on some moral ruler, if you will, of the types of stories that are being told. But to be able to look at your phones and look at who you're connected to and who you're following and the stories that you choose to digest on a daily basis, to ask yourself, what are the narratives that I want to listen to today? And how can they be different than mine? Who can I follow differently? And there's so many voices out there through social media, through storytelling, through news, that are so different than ours. And I think that's a great place to start. And to speak to another point, how do we know that we're listening to people that are on the margins? Well, who's crying out the most? Who's hurting the most? Who feels unseen so that they have to raise their voices a little bit louder? Where do we see pain points in our neighborhood and whose stories are being told? And what does it look like for us to really read those stories through the lens of the people who are experiencing that trauma, who might be experiencing that pain, versus other people that are telling the stories for them. So it's really around the kind of media outlets you're following, the kind of podcasts you're listening to, even the kind of music that you're listening to. I just started recently listening to hip hop. Hip hop is very different than reggae. Hip hop is very different than country. The types of stories that you hear there, the pain, the joys, the experiences of growing up and feeling heartbreak, and your experiences with government or official entities, are very different depending on the types of stories you allow yourself to listen to on a daily basis.
Yeah. I want to work on this. How do I start? I'm going to drive home to my house. I'm going to go to work in the morning. How do I start to infuse this intention or live out this intention to increase my cultural competency?
The best way, and I almost would argue the purest way to improve cultural competency, is to be in relationship, to really consider them a friend, not a friend who I can say, oh yeah, they're from another culture and I'm so glad we're doing this once a month. And it just, that it's just, that's just something that you do because I want to practice cross-cultural bridge building, but simply because I want to know you because I want to know you. And to really say, I'm willing to invite them over when I hang out with my other friends, or I'm willing to carve out my schedule and to reprioritize how I've been prioritizing my time to say, you know what, like if they're truly a friend and I want to treat them like such, then let's do something fun together that I would do with my quote unquote my other friends or my real friends, you know? And whether it's grab a drink or for me play basketball or to really invite them over for a meal and have dinner with them, a fully cooked meal where I'm spending hours just sharing life with them and talk about childhood and adulthood and challenges and everything in between that we face in our families, romantic life, you name it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
What are some things for you as an Asian American that are sometimes sensitive when someone doesn't have cultural kind of awareness and is trying to engage with you?
A difficult experience I've been processing through. Not all Asians are the same. And a big piece of that is, as specifically a Vietnamese American who comes from a refugee background, my narrative is so vastly different than the Taiwanese American or the Japanese American, or in some ways the Chinese American, whose families may come from wealth. And I think even just that, the experiences are very different. I was at a Chinese restaurant with my Korean and Chinese friends. The waiter was taking a long time to see us and get to us so that we could make our order. Growing up, what my parents always taught me was, if you can't get what you want immediately, just go for it. Like just stand up and go find that waiter, even in the kitchen. My parents do that all the time. They'll just walk into the kitchen. In Vietnamese restaurants, even other Asian restaurants, go to the kitchen, flag down the waiter and say, hey, like, can you help me please? I did that. And then a couple other friends said, David, that was really rude. You should just trust a waiter to come to you. And we ended up getting to a little bit of an argument because I'm like, well, if someone's not coming, you need to go get them. You need to just make it happen, because there's kind of this survival mindset versus let's just wait for them to come to you, because that's how restaurants are supposed to do it and that's how waiters supposed to serve you. Whereas if you go to specifically Vietnamese restaurants, there's actually this unspoken culture that you can totally go up to them and say, hey, you can stand up and go over and say, hey, you can actually engage with the waiters and waitresses. Whereas maybe in other Asian cultures, just expect them to come and wait and be patient. So that was like, it wasn't like offensive per se, an offensive conversation that we had, or like we were, but there were definitely different values around how we saw service. And when we don't get the service that we want, how do we respond to that?
And I think those are exactly the kind of dialogues that are so helpful for understanding one another.
Yeah.
How are you cultivating joy in your life right now?
When I think about joy, I think people misconstrue joy as like the big kind of miraculous moments, but what does it look like to experience joy in the mundane moments and kind of in your daily rhythms? And I've been really enjoying walking my dog up our hill and over to this canyon area where we just kind of overlook the canyon and the neighborhood, and just be able to take 3 deep breaths and just enjoy it. I often leave my phone back at the house when I take my dog on a walk, simply so I can just be present with nature and be present on the walk, be able to really experience all 5 senses, where I think sometimes we experience life so much with just visual because of our phones and our touch, right? But smell, sound, different parts of our senses that sometimes we numb out because we're so focused on a screen and our fingers.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you so much, David.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
We just heard from David Tran about the importance of cultural competency. The links to all of his resources are in the description box right below this video. While you're there, in the comment section, let me know how building a bridge to someone has improved your life. Before you go, subscribe for a new video each week, and I look forward to seeing you soon for our next happiness adventure.